Welcome to Surrender School. This is the 2023 Step Study.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Oh, virtual hug. Okay, now.
Our mission is to share 12-step and other supportive recovery solutions with those who want to live free from disordered or unhealthy eating.
Okay. God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, my emotional sobriety, the 12 steps in you, for an open mind and a new experience of myself, my emotional sobriety, the 12 steps, and especially you. All right. 5, 6, and 7 in one day. Okay. So let's see what Lori has to say about this. It's on page 42 on the very first paragraph there on the left. You may ask how we can discuss 3 steps in one chapter. The reason is that the big book actually has us do steps 5, 6, 7, and even 8 on the same day. A little bit further down. We're used to spending a great deal of time and effort thinking about steps 6 and 7 because we read the steps as being equal. And we have 2 major pieces of literature, the OA 12 and 12 and the AA 12 and 12, giving equal number of pages to each step. And if doing that works for you, then I do not suggest making any changes. He says, but I have, however, met many people who have bogged down in step 6 because they don't feel that they are really, really ready to have a particular character defect removed, and or have bogged down at step 7 because they keep waiting for their character defects to be removed before they go on to steps 8 and 9. The big book's approach is clearly different, and I recommend it to you if you're having trouble doing the steps using other methods, or if you want a quick and powerful way of recovering from compulsive eating. That is the way that it is. I mean, that is the original way of doing the steps. I mean, he's absolutely correct on that one. I think particularly if it's your first time through the steps, I think it's great to do it this way because it's so easy to get bogged down in any one of the steps. And so keeping things moving and keeping things going, I think, is a good idea. I also think it's very fruitful to take a deep dive into these steps. But I think it's much more fruitful once you've been around in program for a while. And once you have all the 12-step lingo and way things that work, when you have those under your belt, I think it's really good to do a deep dive. But your first time through, I think it's any excuse not to go ahead, right? And certainly any excuse not to make amends. So I think it's better to do it quickly when it's your first time through, that's for sure. He goes on to say at the very bottom of the left-hand column on page 42, the big book's approach is very simple. In steps 4 and 5, we identify the character defects that block us from our higher power. In steps 6 and 7, we acknowledge our readiness to have those defects removed, and the defects are removed through the actions taken in steps 8 and 9. And Lori will be discussing steps 8 and 9 together next week. But I think that is an awesome encapsulation of what we are doing here. We are identifying our character defects, and then we are getting ready to have them removed, and then we are taking the actions that help remove them from us. I think that's an awesome way of explaining those steps. It's so concise, and I think it's so right on. Okay. Then he goes through step 5, and he goes through, the why, who, how, those kinds of questions. So under the why section on page 42, the right-hand column, he says why we have to do step 5, and he lays it out. The answer is ultimately pretty simple. If we skip, he's quoting the big book here, if we skip this vital step, we may not overcome drinking, compulsive eating, page 72. The big book explains this in some detail. It is important, it says, in completing our housekeeping. If, as we found in step 3 and 4, our problem is one of ego, of self-will, then we have to learn humility, that we aren't and can't be in charge of our own life, let alone the world. People, they say, who don't do step 5 have not learned enough of humility, fearlessness, and honesty in the sense we find it necessary until they told someone else all their life story. And that's page 73 in the big book. We live, they say, a double life in which we pretend to be someone we're not. We must be entirely honest with somebody if we expect to live long or happily in this world. Page 73, 74. Page 74 deals with choosing the person we will share our story with. Aside from the very basic notion of confession is good for the soul, there are other good reasons as well, not listed in the big book. We find that we aren't alone. We have a common humanity. We are not unique in these character defects. We are not the worst person in the world. There is a common humanity element to step 5 that I think is very important. We find that we aren't alone, that the person with whom we're sharing understands us and can probably match every one of our actions with one of his or her own. And we also get insight and feedback that might help us understand ourselves, neither taking ourselves too lightly or too seriously. And I really liked that explanation, the humility, the common humanity, and the feedback and insight we get. And those are the 3 reasons why we must do step 5 with another person, not just ourselves and our higher power. So then he goes into the who. Okay, who do we do step 5 with? And he says on the top of page 43 on the left-hand column, the criteria are simple. It is important that he be able to keep a confidence, that he fully understand and approve what we are driving at, that he will not try to change our plan. A little bit further down at the bottom of the next paragraph, not only have I learned humility, but I have found out that I am not alone. OAers or other 12-steppers can give us that extra ingredient, which is so helpful for us isolated and self-pitying selves. Again, the common humanity. We are all bozos on the same bus. Nobody's better or worse than anybody else. And the confidence part, I think, is very important. And, I've always typically used my sponsor as the person that I give my step 5 to, because they typically know me the best and they've heard me whining and complaining all along, and they can kind of see the patterns and so they have a little bit more of an insight, and they also know what I'm doing, what I'm trying to accomplish in this. I think there's a tendency if we share this with someone else, Other people want to, oh, it's not that bad. Oh, it's that person deserved that, and that's not what we need when we're giving a fifth step. We need to see it very clearly, and we need to see our own character defects in our behavior. We don't want to be given any excuses to continue on with those character defects. So that's why I think it's really important we find someone that knows what we're trying to do here. And I don't know about you guys, but when I did my first fifth step, I felt so much shame around what I was sharing. Now it's like, oh, this is what I did and this is what I did. But the first time that I did it, it was just dripping in shame. And I think if I had given it to someone else who didn't really know what I was trying to do through the 12 steps, they would have been busy comforting me instead of helping me really see my behavior. And so I think that's why sponsors are a natural to go ahead and take a fifth step. But it's not always. Sometimes you may not feel safe enough with your sponsor to do that. And if you can find another person safer, like a therapist or something, then that may be the way to go. Okay, then he talks us about the how. How do we do this fifth step thing? And that's on page 43, left-hand side, about halfway down. I can only give you my experience based on the nature of our step 4 done the big book way and using the forms which are available at the website above. I have found this way to be extremely powerful and, added bonus, quite efficient and relatively brief. I take the step 4 resentment form as folded over with the name of the person, institution, or principle, column 1, across from where I have been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened, column 4. I think this is an important difference here. I have never done a fifth step this way, where I didn't go through the causes and the instincts. I went directly from the person that I'd harmed to the character defects. I've never done that in a step 5. I think that would be really interesting to do, but that's what he's suggesting here. He says, I read off the name, perhaps give a short identifier or explanation of the name, and then read off what I have written in the 4th column. I invite my friend to probe my responses to see if there are other things I might write down and didn't think of. I go from name to name. What I find is that after a few sheets, it gets pretty repetitious. I see how my selfishness, my dishonesty, my self-seeking, and my fear have permeated my entire life, and how I have created virtually identical patterns in so many different situations and so many different people. I am able at times to say, well, these next 3 people on the list are exactly the same, so I can take them together. And I have found that to be true in my own 5th step, that my character defects typically arise when I don't feel safe. And so most of them are geared toward making me feel safe. And my repertoire of behaviors and actions that I take to feel safe, are limited in number. And I repeat them over and over and over in different situations and with different people. And I think it's really great that he talks about when you do that and you start seeing those patterns yourself, or your sponsor helps you see those patterns, you really get a really good idea, a solid idea about what 6 and 7 are about. It's about these patterns, these habits we have of trying to get our needs met in maladaptive ways, right? Through our character defects. Okay, then he goes kind of through, essentially that was the how for resentments, what we just went through. Then he talks about the how for the fears. And that's on page 43, right-hand column, the paragraph that starts, then I take the step 4 fear form. He says, I take the step 4 fear form and read it across the columns. Here is one fear, column 1. Here are the reasons I have it, column 2. I placed my trust and reliance upon my finite self, column 3, and it didn't work, column 4. And I said the fear prayer, column 5. I then discussed briefly exactly what I think my higher power would have me be in relation to that fear. So that's how he says you do step 5 around your fears. And then he talks about in the next paragraph how we do step 5 for our sex conduct. Next paragraph down, he says, then I take the step 4 sex conduct form and read it across the columns. Here is a person I hurt, column 1. Here are the ways in which I was selfish, dishonest, and inconsiderate, column 2. I aroused suspicion, but not bitterness or jealousy, column 3. What I should have done instead was blank, column 4. The relationship was selfish, column 5. And I said the sex prayer, column 6, and the sex meditation, column 7. So I really like how he laid down very concrete instructions for how to do step 5 in, the main character defect, for our main character defects. I really like that. He says, it may seem mechanical, but it's not. And I would agree with him. It's really not. All it is a way to keep things moving so it allows your sponsor or whoever's taking your step 5 to take a look at your patterns and your character defects and be able to give you feedback on them as he goes through. And he says that last paragraph in that section right above the promises heading, where he says, but you can see how little time it need take. I'm not telling my life story from womb to today. I'm not answering a bunch of questions in enormous details. I'm not detailing, this is an important one, the wrongs that others have done to me. I'm focusing on my major defects of character and sharing them with another human being. And I think this is the most important paragraph I've ever read on step 5, to be honest with you. It is so clear here. I'm not taking this opportunity to wallow in self-pity about how awful I've been or how awful people have been to me. It's really very focused on figuring out what your character defects are, how they play out in your life, so that you can work the rest of the steps on them, particularly 10, 11, and 12, when you get down the way. So I love that paragraph. That's my favorite paragraph in step 5. Okay, then he goes into the step 5 promises. And he says, the big book makes certain promises at the end of this part of step 5. If we do not feel these promises, then we have almost certainly left something out, either in step 4 or in step 5. Here are the promises as found on page 75 of the big book. Once we have taken this step, withholding nothing, we are delighted. We can look the world in the eye. We can be alone at perfect peace and ease. Our fears fall from us. We begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. We may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now we begin to have a spiritual experience. The feeling that the drink problem has disappeared will often come strongly. We feel we are on the broad highway walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. And those are beautiful promises. Now, can I say that every time I've done a 5th step, I have experienced those? No, I would be lying if I said that were true. I have felt these at the end of some of my step 5s, but not always. And I usually feel them when I'm able to see something that I couldn't see before. That doing the steps 4 and 5 and interacting with my sponsor in step 5 has provided me new insight into, my own behavior and, the way that people respond to that kind of behavior from me and my part in my own thing. And then I feel those promises. And that's when I know that I've had a spiritual experience, because for me, spiritual experiences are changes in my thinking, a paradigm shift, an insight, an inspiration. Those are what I consider my spiritual experiences to be. And so when I've worked really hard on 4 and 5 and worked hard with my sponsor, I get those promises. But sometimes, I have to say, I don't always work as hard as I need to through 4 and 5 sometimes when I do them. And I've done 4 and 5 multiple times. Okay, then further down on page 44 on the left-hand side, after the bullet, he says, the first time I did this part of step 5, these promises did not come to me. My sponsor suggested I redo step 4 and then do another step 5. I did that, and the promises still didn't come to me. So I did another step 4 and another step 5, and then another. The amazing thing was that each time I redid step 4, I discovered new resentments and new fears and occasionally new sex conduct issues. So I could tell I was going deeper. After the fourth step 4 and the fourth step 5, these promises came true. It was an amazing experience. And maybe during the sharing, we can talk a little bit about this. I mean, the tenacity he had there is exceptional. I don't know if I would have had that level of tenacity, but I give him a lot of props because he clearly did. And he did it until the promises came true for him. And I give him a lot of credit for that. I can honestly say, I don't know if I would have been that tenacious. I would like to think I would be, but I doubt it, knowing me. Okay. So then he talks about kind of what happens after we do the actual sharing with our sponsor. Page 44, the bottom, where he says, not yet finished. He writes, but step 5 isn't yet finished. We've admitted to ourselves and another human being the exact nature of our wrongs, but we haven't yet admitted them to God. The big book tells us to go home and find a place where we can be quiet for an hour, carefully reviewing what we've done. We thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know him better, page 75. So we review what we've written. We look at all our filled out forms again. Then we have a prayer. God, thank you from the bottom of my heart that I know you better. Then the big book tells us to study the first 5 steps and ask our higher power if we have omitted anything. Page 75. Have we done what has to be done? Have we said what has to be said? If the answer is yes, it will probably be yes. Then we go on to step 6 that same day. If the answer is no, then we go back and figure out what we left out in either step 4 or step 5. That's that kind of alone time with my higher power after the experience of step 5 was very powerful for me. It felt like the facade and the pretense of how I'd been living my life was falling away. It wasn't completely gone, but it was starting to fall away. It was starting to loosen. And that was an incredibly moving experience for me when I felt that. Okay, he has us going right on. Step 6, same day. Page 45, top of the left-hand column. Doing step 4 and 5, the Big Book way, we have realized that we have 4 major character defects, all stemming from our wish to have our own way. Remember, even if our way would make everyone happy, okay? The motive behind the reason we want our own way is not important. The reason is that we demand to have our own way and we do things in order to get it. So we are selfish. We basically want our way, whether for good or bad or a mixture of reasons. We are dishonest. We don't tell others or ourselves the truth about reality. We are self-seeking. How others react to us defines how we feel about ourselves, and we think of ourselves and not others. And we are full of fear. So our character defects, in essence, boil down to these big 4. These big 4: selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened. The big 4. Now, he says, skip a paragraph, and then we're still on the left-hand column. Are we ready to have our higher power remove these 4 major character defects? My experience tells me that you will be if you do step 4 the Big Book way. You won't want to hold on to selfishness, dishonesty, self-seeking, and fear when you realize how they have truly harmed your life. And it's important here not to get stuck in being really ready, okay? Because to me, it was a fearful time of stepping into a new life. And I wasn't sure what it was going to feel like or how it was going to go. And so I had some fear. I had some trepidation. I had some hesitancy. And if I had waited till I was really, 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 really ready, I never would have moved. I never would have done anything. I wouldn't have gone on. So it's enough for me to be ready to have the consequences of the big 4 removed. Okay, I was able to see the logic of removing the causes of most of the nastiest consequences in my life. Okay. Then down there on the left-hand side in that yellow box, I think this is just an incredibly brilliant way to boil it down to the big 4 character defects, where he says, many inventory methods will list things like gossip or lust or gluttony or cheating or lying as defects of character. These things appear to me to be actions, not defects. A defect of character is something that gives rise to wrong actions. That is not something I'd ever thought of before. He says, that's why I like the Big Book's approach to step 4. I have certainly gossiped, but in and of itself, gossiping was not my character defect. I did it because I was selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened. I think that's a really interesting way of boiling it down to the big 4 and separating character defects from actual actions. I thought that was a really interesting decoupling. And maybe you guys will want to share on that when we get to sharing. Okay, so then what we do is we are ready. So we go right into step 7. Okay. He says on page 45, right-hand side, you say the prayer on page 76 of the Big Book. My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. He says a brilliant prayer. We get to keep some of the minor symptoms of those defects of character, which do not stand in the way of our usefulness to our higher power and our fellows. So he's saying we're not in saint school. We're not in the process of being, driven as pure as the white snow. Okay, we are not going to be perfect people after we do this. I think that's great to remind us of that. He says, we may have those, I have many of them, interests that occasionally turn into obsessions, for instance. But it's simply a prayer. The big book is very clear about this. There are no promises for step 7 either. You just say the prayer and then you're ready for some action. I think that's really simple and straightforward. And I think people do get caught up with the notion that when they say the prayer, their character defects are supposed to be completely removed before they move on to the other steps. And that's not true. You're just saying the prayer for their removal and you move on and you take more action. There's no reason at all to get stuck there. And then he does like a quick sum up or an overview here. He says, bottom of page 45, step 6 and 7 are simply way stations on these steps. They are moments in time right after our step 5 when we consider where we have come from and where we are going to. They're almost like a time for brief reflection and our progress so far. The removal of our defects of character comes only when we take action. The big book says, now we need more action, without which we find that faith without works is dead. Then it talks about steps 8 and 9, which Lori will go through next week. So that is all I've got today. So let's open it up for questions.
I have a sponsee who is talking to me about jealousy and where that falls. I just would like you to talk about that.
Well, if it's only, I guess if it's only thoughts of jealousy, to me, that would fall within selfishness. Because you're not, are we talking envy or are we talking jealousy? Because envy is wanting something that someone else has, and jealousy is being upset about the attention that someone else is getting. Like usually jealousy requires 3 people and envy can require 2 or more. So do you know which one it was?
It is the jealousy.
Oh, it is the jealousy. Okay.
Wait, it's 3 people, right? At least 3 people. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I guess I would put that as selfish, because you are thinking that, I had a professor in college that called it the Bull Durham theory of love. And the Bull Durham theory of love is Bull Durham used to be a pack of tobacco, and it came in a little bag. It was loose leaf tobacco and it came in a bag, and that's what people rolled their cigarettes from. Okay. And so what that means is there's a finite amount of love. And if you get some of this love, then that's love I can't get from that person. Okay. And it's selfish. It's thinking there's a finite amount of love and I need it all to myself. There's a finite amount of attention. I need it all to myself. And so to me, that's selfish. Now, if you do things to disrupt the relationship between the other 2 people, then I would call that self-seeking, because you're taking action to destroy that other relationship. So that's how I would explain that. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
You wouldn't view it as fear at all?
Okay, all right. I think you're right. I think there is excellent, Pam. I think there is a fear component to that. Because there's not enough. I won't get mine. I won't get mine. I won't get enough love. I won't get enough attention. Or maybe they'll talk about me and decide to cut me out entirely. And then I'll have nothing. Yeah, that's excellent, Pam. I would agree. character defects and character assets. And should we be making lists of both of those things? And I will tell you what Lori would say, that the big book never talks about character assets. And so I think I'm putting words in his mouth, but I'm thinking that character assets would not have anything to do with step 4 and 5 and 6 and 7. Now, I know the OA 12 and 12, I believe, talks about character assets. And, you know, I guess personally, when I go through the steps, I guess it depends on where the person is. If the person is so drowning in shame and really super harsh on themselves, instead of like trying to, like they're crucifying themselves over their character defects, then I may want to go through and do some character assets with them so that they get a more balanced view of themselves, because we aren't all character defects. We have many assets. But if I'm with someone who's been in 12-step a long time and they, you know, and they know the routine for 4 and 5, I might not do that. But I think the big book way is absolutely not. You don't go over character assets. That's not what you're doing at this time. So that's my guess of what Lori would say.